All right. At this time, we're going to move to another important area in our life together, and that is a report on the Commission on a Way Forward. We have been blessed in our annual conference to have Julie Hegler Love to serve on that commission. And I have watched Julie in deep prayer and oftentimes in deep frustration and anxiety. But she's always allowed the Spirit of God to revive her soul and to keep going. And so we are blessed and grateful, Julie. I know it's been a lot of hard work, a lot of time put in, a lot of travel, a lot of sleepless nights. But we're grateful that you hung in there. And we in Kentucky, we've been praying for you. We ain't done yet. We're still praying for you. So Julie, if you would share with us, thank you.
I know this morning y'all thought the bishop was preaching to you, but he was preaching to me this morning. I think that what he preached may be a compilation of a lot of the things that he has said to me over the course of my work on the commission. Come, Holy Spirit, let me be open to your Spirit. I want to begin by acknowledging that we're gathered here today in this room with persons who have some different perspectives on the topic of LGBTQ inclusion, but we're all here because we have invested in our beloved United Methodist Church. I've worked very hard on my language for this presentation and how I'm using it, but I also realize when you speak in some generalities, hurt can often happen. So I invite you to hold an umbrella of grace over me with this, but please do come and contact me or speak privately later if you want to share anything with me that I said that was hurtful. That's how I learn. I get many questions about serving on the Commission on a Way Forward, but one I get quite often is, what is the most difficult thing someone has said or communicated to you during your work? While there have been some unpleasant and unfortunately toned comments, the one that has made for sleepless nights and a few tears was from my 19-year-old daughter, Eliza. Many of you in this room have invested in her throughout her life. She's exploring a call to ministry now. The word seminary has come from her mouth. But when we were talking about leadership and young adult leadership in the United Methodist Church, she said this to me: I hope there is something left to lead when we get our chance. That was like a knife into my heart. So I begin with this not to start us on a downward spiral, but to remind us that we aren't dealing with issues, but we're talking about calls to ministry. We're talking about souls, disciples, and we are to do this work not for just those who are within our walls, but for those beyond our walls who have not heard the good news. We must stay on mission through all of this. And I can't tell you how many times in our work on the commission that we would say things like, yes, but is that going to make the most disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world? That is our mission in the United Methodist Church. So while Liza's words have followed me in my participation in the commission, and many of you have heard me say this is the hardest leadership work I've ever done, there has also been much joy, many friendships, and I continue to have hope and see possibility for our beloved United Methodist Church. I'm going to share a bit more with you about the commission, and I'm basing a lot of what I'm sharing on a presentation by Reverend Dr. Gil Rendell, who at our last commission meeting in May led us through a remembrance of our whole process. It was recorded with the hope that many of our delegations will watch it as they prepare for General Conference, and I'm hopeful we'll get that recording soon for our delegation. Gil served as the coach for our moderators. We had 3 bishops who are moderators. You will hear from one of them tonight, Bishop Ken Carter, who will be preaching here tonight. And while I have read a lot about adaptive leadership and tried to practice it to the best of my ability, Gil is a master at leading a group in a new way with a non-anxious presence. So I want to talk a bit about what's before us. Some of you have heard lots about the commission, and some of you are going, what is the commission? So I realize I'm presenting with all of those perspectives in mind. So what's before us is we have a disagreement about paragraph 161.g in our Book of Discipline. I'm not going to read the whole thing to you, but it says, in part, we affirm that all persons are individuals of sacred worth and created in the image of God. The United Methodist Church does not condone the practice of homosexuality and considers this practice incompatible with Christian teaching. We affirm God's grace is available to all, and we implore families and churches not to reject or condemn lesbian and gay members and friends. And we commit ourselves to be in ministry for and with all persons. Same-sex marriage, how we officiate or don't officiate at those, our clergy, ordination of self-avowed practicing homosexual persons. Also, the ability to reach LGBTQ persons and their allies and include them in the life of the church. And a realization that people are leaving our churches. Progressive people are leaving. Traditional people are leaving. I spoke with a young adult from this conference not long ago who left our denomination because we can't make a decision and move forward on this. So let's take a moment and think about where we are. A bit more than 2 years ago, the 2016 General Conference, which is the only group that can speak for the United Methodist Church and the only group that makes any changes to our Book of Discipline, this group met in Portland, and this international body decided to defer all votes on human sexuality and refer the entire subject to a special commission named by the bishops. It was felt that we were at an impasse at that General Conference. The commission was named, and we have worked for 1 1/3 years. We've been in dialogue constantly with our Council of Bishops, presented them with several sketches of possibilities, commonly known as the One Church, the Connectional Conference, formerly known as Branches. We had lots of names, and Traditionalist. Also, a theological framework and a missional framework. The Council of Bishops has recommended the One Church plan. Bishop Fairley will be sharing about this more, but they are forwarding all of our work to General Conference 19, where a decision will be made by the delegates there. So this is where we are, and while I've outlined some of the basics, it's important that we also name that in the midst of this, as Bishop mentioned, many blogs and articles have been written, social media posts have been made, opinions have been shared, and here's the thing, all the details aren't out yet, which I understand is deeply frustrating. I get that. It is a messy time. And this is how we communicate in this year. In our time, we communicate by blogs and social media. But in general, we have an incredible amount of anxiety at this point, and I found that naming that is very helpful in acknowledging it. One of the authors that I have found very helpful in my journey on the commission is Thomas Merton. Bishop quoted one of my favorite poems from him earlier, a Trappist Roman Catholic monk who lived in the mid-20th century and who Kentucky claims as her own, as he predominantly lived at the Abbot of Gethsemane, not far from my house. And I want to share this quote from Thoughts in Solitude that I read almost every day before I walked into a commission meeting. In our age, everything has to be a problem. Ours is a time of anxiety because we have willed it to be so. Our anxiety is not imposed on us by a force from the outside. We impose it on our world and upon one another from within ourselves. Sanctity in such an age means, no doubt, traveling from the area of anxiety to the area in which there is no anxiety. Or perhaps it may mean learning from God to be without anxiety in the midst of anxiety. It's really challenging. It's a challenging place to live. But how many times does the Bible say, do not be afraid? The answer is a lot. I'm sure there's a technical answer of an exact number, but in general, it's a lot. Do we really believe what we preach, folks? God is with us always. What is not helpful for us is to, and for me, I'm speaking personally, is to live in anxiety and only dwell in it. So I want to share with you a story of how we did our work as a commission. We were called together in a different way and called to do different work. This Albert Einstein quote is one we often looked at. We cannot solve our problems with the same thinking we use to create them. Or, familiar to us from the Gospel of Mark, no one sews a piece of new unshrunk cloth on old clothes. No one pours new wine into old wineskins. As the commission, we approached our work in a different way from the beginning, as the bishop set up this group to be different than many other groups in our denomination. 32 persons from 9 nations, men and women, straight and gay, laity, elders, deacons, bishops, and a lay person who actually became a local pastor during our time together. A full span of generations. We even welcomed a new baby. Casey Langley Orr had Abigail during our time together, and she is the woman, because she only missed one meeting in that whole thing, and brought Abigail with her to the last meeting. And we had a full span of theological positions. Over our time, we were physically together for 26 days, which means on top of that, we traveled a lot to get to our meetings, and I had nothing on the people. We only had one meeting for me that was overseas. Our persons from Africa and Europe and the Philippines, they were traveling a 24-hour period before and after each meeting and over many time zones. But during our days together, we ate many meals together, we prayed, we worshiped, we studied the Bible together, we loved, we learned, we led. We became friends. Today, I've texted several commission members, and they are praying for our time together as I speak. The report you will see eventually does not come from like-minded people, but I can confidently say we are all Christ followers and deeply care for our beloved United Methodist Church. The other thing about this group is, I will say, is they came prepared. How many times have you gone to a meeting and people tell you they're prepared, but you can tell pretty quickly that they haven't read what they were supposed to read? Or maybe you've led a Bible study and they said they read the material, but you can tell pretty quickly they didn't. Folks, these people came prepared. And so that's my expectation for every meeting now. Everybody comes prepared. Me too. And we worked in a conciliar manner. We didn't debate. We didn't use parliamentary procedure. There was no Robert's Rules of Order on our table. During our time, no votes were taken. There were times when some of us were angry, upset, and in tears. It was tense at times. But none of us left the table for good. Honestly, a few of us might have walked around the block a few times and came back in. But everybody stayed at the table. Everybody kept contributing. Our report is the product of this conversation, study, prayer, listening, transparency, and trust. Again, we took no votes. As I reflected on our work and much of the ministry, personally, that we've been doing in Kentucky through our process of loving, learning, and leading, here's one of the things that I think is vital and key. As the commission, we spent a lot of time together. We broke bread together many times. We heard about faith journeys. We learned about cultures very different than our own. I really don't think there is a shortcut here, folks. If we want to move together, we have to be willing to spend time together, and more than just one meal with somebody we disagree with. We have to do it over and over again in our churches, in our conference, and frankly, in our world. Who better to lead this kind of holy conversation than United Methodists, than Christians? Now, I'm going to pause here and take a moment of personal privilege and say thank you to Bishop Fairley, who I think he was about a month into being bishop when I came to him and said, I just got this invitation, and I need to be gone during the next year, 30 days. And he was very gracious and said, do it. I also need to say thank you to our connectional staff and conference staff who covered a lot of my responsibilities during that time, and to my family for foregoing a lot of time together. But it was a privilege, an incredible privilege to serve. So as we're doing our work in a different way, we spend a lot of time trying to understand our context. While I have known for years about the global context of the United Methodist Church, I never fully understand it as I do now. Look at who we are. We are 13 million persons. We are in the U.S., we're in blue states and red states. In the U.S., we are in over 95% of our counties. We have persons in African nations where homosexuality is illegal. In the Philippines, our churches are very conservative there. At the same time, the Philippines just elected their first transgender congresswoman. In Western Europe has fewer issues and has more acceptance of same-sex marriage, but Eastern Europe is very different. Our generations are different and have fewer issues. Again, I'm speaking in large generalities, but our context is very complex in the United Methodist Church, and we need to remember that as well. So if it's not a problem we're solving, we are choosing to try a new way of talking and thinking and leading. Our mission, vision, scope of the Commission on a Way Forward, I really don't know how many times I read that, but it was many, many times. Bishop Wallace Padgett, who was also on the commission, she and I would go, okay, when we were talking, go back to mission, vision, scope. And here's what we were told to do. We want to find a church that can be as connected and unified as possible. That can be as agile, responsive, and contextual as possible. That can live and address the widest global and cultural mission field as possible. Folks, that's what your delegates at General Conference 2019 are going to try to figure out. What is possible in all of this? So our timeline is we hope to see the legislation by the early July. It will not be released until it is translated into all the languages, which is only fair. Delegates are going to be preparing. I know our delegation has 3 meetings scheduled between now and February. And then the special session of General Conference will happen in February of 2019 at St. Louis. Again, to do this, we need to spend a lot of time together. And I can see this and know, Bishop and I have talked, that this needs to be a central part of my ministry in the coming year. So where possible, I am happy to meet with will be meeting with the delegation, but with other groups in the conference, or to find other persons who can. We are trying to move forward in relationship with each other. Another book that has been most helpful recently to me is Canoeing the Mountains, Christian Leadership in Uncharted Territory by Todd Bolsinger. I know some of our large church pastors in the Heartland district got to spend some time with him recently. In it, he quotes Margaret Wheatley, who says, "The primary way to prepare for the unknown is to attend to the quality of our relationships, to how well we know and trust one another. Being with each other, especially those with whom we might disagree, is an important part of how we live together and how God is calling us to move forward together." So with a heart of peace and convicted humility, I thank you for being able to serve on this commission. While it was the hardest leadership thing I've done, I can also say I've never felt more prayed for. And you're going to hear more about our praying our way forward, but please know that on the commission we felt those prayers. Thank you.